This happened to me whilst I was in primary school. I was in year 4, which would have made me 8 or 9 years old. I live in a fairly quiet town in the UK. I only live maybe 2 or 3 streets away from my school, so from a fairly young age my mom trusted me to walk to school, either with my friends or alone. A few of these times people would smile and say hello, or ask if I was okay. I'd explain I was on my way to school. I was usually fairly late, so I was the only kid about. Everyone knew how close the school was, so I'd just carry on with my travels. I've drawn a little diagram of the street leading to my school. My artistic abilities aren't great, but I think I'd struggle to fully describe the surroundings. The green splodges are quite thick trees that lined the side of the road. The ground around the trees and fences were maybe a meter or so lower than the road, so there was a little sliding bank going down. The school was fairly old, and the fence that once contained the trees had seen better days. Most of it had either fallen down or rusted apart. All the kids were under strict instructions not to go down to the bank. But hey, we were kids. The lighter green area was just grass that we were under strict instructions to never play on, unless we were with a teacher. I've added the little orange line to give some reference as to how long the road is. That's about a car's length. So anyway, I'm walking to school one day, and I notice a guy sit down in the grass on the bank, the purple circle. I keep to the other side of the road, and go on with my day in school. Over the next week, he's there every day, sitting with his legs going up the bank, facing the road, in a very strange position, just looking around. I keep my distance, and it's starting to freak me out. But I was young, and by the time I reached the school, I was entirely distracted and forgot all about it. This happened nearly every day for a week. Yeah, I was late every day. I was a lazy kid, and my mom worked mornings, so I usually missed registration. I'm sure once or twice he yelled for me, but as I was walking to the other side of the road, I paid no attention and just carried on. On the Friday of that week, I set out to my school as normal. This time pretty much on time. I notice the guy isn't there, and I paused for a second. I couldn't tell you whether that frightened me or not, because in all honesty, I don't remember. I carried on walking, not giving it too much thought. Probably stopped to pick some grass off the banks as usual, as I pick it as I'm walking. Not in any kind of rush, just enjoying the stroll. It's then that I notice that it's really quiet. Like I said, I'm fairly on time, and usually there's upwards of 200 children lining up to go inside. It was usually very noisy, with kids laughing and playing, and yet as I'm walking, I couldn't hear anything but the birds and my own breath. I got to the end of the street and turned to go through the gate, the blue line, and as I look, I was so embarrassed. There's no one on the playground, and the shutters are closed. It must be an inset day. Teachers are still in on inset days, so I figure I'll go inside and just ask one of my teachers to call my mom and ask her to come and get me. If none of the doors are open, I'll just walk back home. I open the gate, and like usual it made the loud crashing noise of metal on metal as it shut behind me. It was then that I saw the reception door fly open and a teacher bound towards me. At first, just the sudden movement shocked me, and I was a little scared. I didn't really have time to process anything before she literally snatched me up and ran me back inside the building. Safe to say, I'm in complete shock and have no idea what's going on. She asked me where I've been and if I'm okay. I can see teachers standing around with panic on their faces, and in all honesty, I thought I was in trouble. Turns out, one of my very best friends, Molly, had been walking to school that morning when a man who had sat on the bank asked her to come look at something on the ground next to him. She was walking alone, so she told him no and that she had to go to school. He stood up and walked over to her, showing her a flower in his palm. I'm not sure what he said to her. I've never asked her for specific details, but it was something that put her at ease. He asked her name, and she told him it was Molly. After that, she said goodbye, and knowing Molly, probably with a great big smile, carried on walking along the road, and apparently he went back by the trees. When she reached the gate, it was relatively early. She went to a breakfast club, so the playground was empty, and she started walking towards the school, the blue circle. She heard someone yelling her name, so she walked back towards the trees to see what was happening. That was when this guy hurls himself at her, restrained her, and tried dragging her back into the bank. I don't know the exact details, but I know there was a struggle. More than luckily, she did what she had always been taught and kept shrieking as loud as she could. This alerted a teacher, who ran out of the school building towards the noise. As soon as the guy saw the doors opening, he pushed Molly to the ground and took off into the bank. The school was put into complete shutdown. The police were called, the kids already in breakfast club were kept in the building, and people's parents were called to tell them not to bring their kids to school. Except for old Wanderer over here. Like I said, my mom worked and wasn't able to be contacted. Anyway, I stayed in there with Molly and the police officers until my mom came to pick us up. Then I remember staying at Molly's house for nearly a week because all she did was cry. Truly heartbreaking stuff to remember. I'm a male and was around 17 at the time. This story takes place on a winter's night in a small town in southern England. I was over at my friend's house for a few drinks, as we were too young to hit the pubs, and the weather was too cold to drink in the woods as usual. My friend lived around 2 miles from where I lived, and around halfway home there was a shortcut through the woods, where we regularly hung out, which would shave off a precious few minutes on my walk home. We were having a good time and enjoying a few cans of cider. I think it's a rite of passage for English youth. And at around 11 p.m., I decided to head home as I had work the next morning. I headed out of my friend's house and through the alleyway to the main road. It was here that I noticed someone on the other side of the road about half a mile back. I thought nothing of it. It's a quiet town, and I had made this walk plenty of times before without any issues. As I started walking, I felt an odd sensation, and the hairs on the back of my neck started to stand on end. I turned around to see the person had crossed the road and was now walking on the same side of the road as me, still away behind me, but I could see it was a large man with a hooded top on. Being a relatively switched-on person, I decided to cross the road to see if he copied me. No sooner than I had done that, sure enough, the man followed suit. At this point, I started to nope out and walk faster. I kept checking behind me to see if he was walking faster, and there was a glint of something in his hand. Now, it could have been anything, but my brain was telling me this guy had a knife. I continued walking until I was around 100 meters away from the shortcut. Now I had a decision to make. Do I take the shortcut through the woods, or do I continue another half mile towards the main road where there's usually cars? As I mentioned earlier, I spend a lot of time in those woods, and felt I would at least have a chance to lose this guy in there. Looking back, the guy was about 200 meters behind me, and gaining fast. My fight or flight kicked in, and I started sprinting towards the gate in the shortcut. The shortcut was a small unlit dirt road, wide enough for a car to fit down with back gardens on one side, long grass on the other, and tree roots littering the path. As I rounded the gate and onto the path, I checked back, and the man was fully sprinting behind me. I got about 10 meters down the path and tripped on one of the roots, falling flat on my face. Part darkness and part alcohol to blame, I would say. Knowing I had seconds to make a decision on what to do before he got to the gate, I didn't think I could get up and go quick enough. Plus, my knee was shot after falling down. I did the first thing that came to my mind, and I rolled off the path and into the tall grass and lay there, trying to be as silent and still as possible. A moment later, I hear the gate rattle and someone walk up the path behind me. Unable to see, as I was laying on my front facing forward, I prayed that he would not spot me. The man lingered for a moment, around 4 foot away from where I was laying, catching his breath. He was breathing really heavy, and I could tell he was straining his eyes to try and see down the path in the dark. After what felt like an eternity, he started walking off down the path, and I watched him as far as I could into the darkness. My heart was beating so fast, and the adrenaline was pumping through my body. I had sobered up very fast, and was now actually aware of every single noise in the woods. I waited around 10 minutes after I last saw him, before getting slowly to my feet. I very slowly made it towards the road, listened carefully for any noises that were out of place in the woods, and kept a low profile move back towards the gate. As I reached the gate, I heard a loud bang behind me. I spun around and saw that a black cat had just jumped onto one of the fences. No sign of the man. I made my way onto the road and managed to get home without any further incident. Needless to say, I was incredibly wary every time we returned to the woods for a drink. I'm a biologist, and frequently am by myself in remote locations. This occurred when I was 26, and somewhere between green and seasoned. I was surveying wetlands in the remote area of the Appalachians, in an area dominated by thick pine forests. I always got to the country assessor site and printed off a map with the landowner information so I wouldn't trespass. That'll get you shot. At this particular site, there was a private driveway going through the U.S. Forest Service land, public, that would let me get to this area a little quicker. This driveway was absolutely public property. At no point did I trespass. I pulled onto this road, clearly created by the USFS, and pulled off to the side about 30 yards from his private entry gate. My vehicle was clearly marked as a state government vehicle. The forest is old-growth pine, but on the outer edges of the forest, it's thick with undergrowth, forming some kind of wall before you get under the pines in a nice open understory. I walk about 200 yards in when nature calls, and I make like a bear in the woods and do my business. I'm a biologist, no biggie. Midway through, I hear yelling back at my truck. I think, great, now I have to deal with this. I'm wrapping up my business, getting ready to walk back to my truck, and I hear gunshots. I stopped walking and thought, yeah, I'm not going back to that. I was at a loss of exactly what to do, and stood there for about a minute considering my options, when I heard him break through the undergrowth of the edge of the forest. Shit! He's coming into the woods! Again, this is public property. I get a bad vibe. This is absolutely the type of area where people just straight up disappear. And they do. It's very, very remote, and the communities are very closed. This county has more than double the amount of game wardens than other counties, for a very good reason. I take off in a crouching jog, using my sense of direction to make it out to the main road about 600 yards away. More gunshots, except these have a crack to them. That means they're coming in my direction. There's no way he sees me, but maybe he is hearing me. Maybe he's firing above my head. Adrenaline kicks in 100% now, and I'm moving with a mix of terror/urgency to get to the main road. I eventually get to the main road and hide under a bridge. I call a colleague to give him details of where I'm at so they can at least find my body, and then I call 911. This was the first time in my life I'd ever called 911. The 911 operator doesn't believe me, But eventually I get in touch with a deputy. He doesn't believe me either. He says, they're probably just shooting at tin cans. Bullshit. It's Sunday night, 7 p.m., and he's too lazy to get off his ass. I move further into the public hunting area, and the game warden stops in. God bless him. He took me seriously, and a few locals come by and comment that the landowner is an asshole. He was from Louisiana, and not a local. I get along with all the locals I had encountered, so that made more sense. After an hour, the deputy gives me a ride back to my state vehicle. The son of a bitch is parked on an ATV with a rifle laid across his lap, waiting for me in the dark. The deputy and I get out of the car, and I just walk straight to my truck and leave. It's almost 9 p.m., and I have a 4-hour drive to get home, and I'd just had enough. At the time, I didn't want to talk to the guy at all, but now I wish I had. Who knows the conversation the deputy and him had? After this, I quietly started carrying a firearm in the field with me at all times. I'm glad I trusted my gut feeling and insisted on a police escort back to my vehicle. That was not an encounter/conversation I wanted to have with someone with an overly active trigger finger. I had all the guy's contact information from county assessor site and thought about mailing him a map clearly stating where his property begins and ends, but I let it go. Maybe he thought I was the creep. If you enjoyed this video, you know what to do. If you would like a chance to have your story featured in an upcoming video, make sure you check out the description for information on how to submit your stories. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll catch you in the next video. And just remember, it's always scarier if it's true.